After all, one of the incarnations of Vasudeva is Lord Ramachandra, right? Mm-hmm. So, in honor of Lord Ramachandra's appearance day coming later this month, during this visit we began reading Ramayana from Krishna Dharma's rendition, and we got as far as Vishwamitra is now taking Lakshmana and Ram into the forest to deal with Maricha and Subala, and Tataka also. Now, when I began reading Krishna Dharma's Ramayana, one of the main reasons was I really like his writing style. And I also read his introduction. And in his introduction, he says that he's primarily relying upon Valmiki Ramayana. And of course, Valmiki Ramayana is the gold standard, although there's many other Ramayanas. Just listening to a recording of Prabhupada speaking in England, and there was a frisky gentleman from Scotland who was arguing with Prabhupada, starting with, do you accept the Vedanta Sutra and the Upanishads and Mahabharata? And Prabhupada said, yes, of course, they're authored by Vyasa. And then pause, and Prabhupada added, and Valmiki Ramayana. So Prabhupada specifically honored Valmiki Ramayana, although I've come to understand there's multiple Ramayanas that Vaishnavas honor, but again, Valmiki Ramayana is the gold standard. So on Saturday evening, which is when we ended up, I read two sections from the first two chapters of his Ramayana, and I was a little surprised. I'm going to share with you what he wrote, and then kind of like a course correction on what he wrote, at least from Valmiki Ramayana. In Krishna Dharma's writing, when Vishwamitra was asking for Ram to go to the forest with him for dealing with Maricha and Subala, etc., as we know, Dasarath was reluctant. Now, in Krishna Dharma's writing, Vashishta calls Dasarath to the side. Vashishta then took the king aside and spoke in confidence. He told him of Ram's identity. He also said that the arrival of Vishwamitra had been arranged by Providence. Let's say it again. Vishwamitra's arrival had been arranged by Providence for the good of the world. The king should therefore have no fear in sending Ram with the sage. So he's disclosing Ram's identity as Vishnu. Dasarath was astonished. Rama was his beloved child in need of protection. How could he possibly be the Supreme Lord? Dasarath looked at Vashishta, who stood silently, gazing into the king's eyes. There's no sound. Amplification. Gazing into the king's eyes, the sage could not possibly tell a lie, accepting the words of his preceptor, and feeling somewhat reassured, Dasarath agreed to send his son with Vishwamitra. Now, those of you that know Valmiki Ramayana, you know that Dasarath has filial affection for his son, not my son is the personality of Godhead. We all know that. So some version of Ramayana was a cut and paste for Krishna Dharma. I guess it was a shortcut that made it easier, or whatever the reason. But there are two passages in Valmiki Ramayana, there's echo, that indicate Dasarath had a hint from Vishwamitra Muni. It's a celebrated section of Balakanda. That celebrated section is Sarga 19, text 14. When Dasarath, the celebrated section, is an often commented upon by commentators verse, particularly the Sri Vaishnava commentators. They like this verse, where he says, Aham Vedami Mahatmanam Ramam Satya Parakramam Vashishtopi Mahateja Yeche Me Tapasi Stata. Meaning, I know Ram, who is a great soul. It doesn't say he's God, it says he's a great soul. True to his prowess, Satya Prarakrama. Satya Prarakrama, true to his prowess. And also Vishishta of great luster, and these other sages who have been steadfast in asceticism also know. Now, commentators take this verse and say, aha, this is a disclosure of Vishwamitra Muni that Ram was Lord Vishnu. Now, he doesn't say he's Lord Vishnu. It's not the same. It's something like from Krishna's pastimes. Gargamuni saying that this son of yours has powers like Narayan. Do you have a screwdriver? Do you have a screwdriver in the house? This microphone keeps sagging. It's a little annoying, so I'll just hold it for now. So I'll read the Sanskrit again. Aham Vedmi, I know. Mahatmanam, noble-minded. Ramam, Lord Rama. Satya, samprakaramam. Tighten that screw. So I don't know what the commentary says. I know that there's ample commentary because those that like Ramayana refer to this regularly. That in this case, Vishwamitra Muni is indicating the divinity of Ram. That's one. It's not so direct. But there's one that's very direct. And that comes later in the same Balakanda when Parshuram and Ram have their confrontation. Parshuram challenges Ram to string the bow. He strings the bow, pulls it back, and something happens. The power of Parshuram goes to Ram. And Parshuram says, by your seizing and bending this bow, I can understand that you are the imperishable Lord Vishnu, the slayer of the Madhu demon and supreme Lord of the gods. And Dasarath heard this. Now there are a few others that also heard it. That's because they hadn't fallen unconscious when Parshuram showed up. The others fell unconscious. But Vashishta didn't, and the sages, along with Vashishta, didn't fall unconscious, and Dasarath didn't. So they heard. I'll read it again. This is Dasarath learning directly from Parshuram that his son is Lord Vishnu. By your seizing and bending this bow, I can understand that you are the imperishable Lord Vishnu, the slayer of the Madhu demon and supreme Lord of the gods. Now, in the earlier discussion, which Vashishta is indicating indirectly, Dasarath didn't get it because he's absorbed in the mood of his son, Lord Ramachandra, my dear son. The parental affection, Vatsalya Rasa, he was deeply involved. here he's hearing it. And what the commentators say about this verse from Balakanda is very few people heard, and it wasn't repeated, because if it had been repeated, it would have compromised or prejudiced the benediction of Lord Brahma to Ravana, and it would have kind of spoiled the whole Leela. But he let the cat out of the bag, or he disclosed it, Parshuram. So it's there. But it's certainly not a prominent mood of Dasratha. Oh, he's the personality of Godhead. Because it would have spoiled the rest of the Leela. So his parental affection covered him again. We can say like that. Certainly we hear about that happening with Lord Ramachandra, with Krishna and his parents and so forth. And not only his parents, all the Brijbasis. He showed his divinity and they couldn't see it. There's many examples. He showed them the spiritual sky. They were curious. He showed them the spiritual sky. And they saw themselves with Krishna in the spiritual sky. And then they forgot everything. Yogamaya. So Dasarath's got a little Yogamaya going on also. Internal potency. But that's just a detail in case you like details about Ramayana. That there are two places where the divinity of Ram was disclosed to Dasarath. And the scholars that I know of Ramayana don't know of any others than those two. And then there was something else that we came across in those first two chapters of Krishna Dharma's Ramayana. And that had to do with when it was actually the prologue of Krishna Dharma's Ramayana. It is taken from the Uttarakanda, where the history of Ravan's exploits and curses are described. So one of those was he has the Pushpaka Vimana. He went traveling in the northerly direction. He came to the Himalayas and came to a screeching halt. He was angry. He came in for a landing, and he saw Nandi. And it describes Nandi as having the face of a monkey. I'll read. This is Krishna Dharma's writing. Ravana saw a strange being with a monkey's head. The creature appeared dreadful, with dark yellowish complexion and misshapen features. Although his body was large, he had a dwarfish stature. He was clean-shaven and muscular, and he stood holding a large glowing pike. As he gazed at Ravana, the demon called out to him, "Who are you? And where is this region? Why have I been impeded?" Answer, "I am Nandi, the servant of Shiva," replied the unusual being. And then comes, Ravana says what he says, and he insults Nandi, and he insults Lord Shiva. And then Nandi, in the shape of a monkey, says, "As you disregard me in my monkey form, there shall be born on earth many monkeys of terrible strength who will annihilate your race." Very clear. Valmiki Ramayana. And just like I expressed, Prabhupada is referring, of course we accept what Vyasadeva wrote, we accept Valmiki Ramayana. So how do you reconcile Nandi's a bull and he's got another feature that looks like a monkey, or at least a monkey face? Clean shaven, certain color, and so forth. And there isn't a commentary that I'm aware of, although I searched and asked some scholars to search. Can't find a commentary, other than kind of the obvious. And the obvious is these beings have mystic powers. They can travel here and there, and they can change shapes, and that's one of the things that they do. So, although Nandi is normally described as and shows the form of a bull, apparently he can show other forms. And specifically for protection, because he was guarding the gate to Mount Kailash, he wasn't in the form of a bull, he was in the form of a monkey with a weapon in his hand. So I could destroy you in a flash, but I won't. Instead, it'll be destroyed later. So, shape-changing mystic power. Because when I first read that, long ago, I read, and I was like, is this a misprint? Because Nandi's not a monkey. Anyway, that's an explanation. So I'll continue reading, and I expect there's going to be other, hey, this isn't in Valmiki Ramayana points. There were some other ones I skipped over. But his writing style is fantastic. He takes you there through words. He paints such a nice picture, you're transported. So they're leaving Ayodhya, heading for Vishwamitra's ashram. Vishwamitra walked ahead of the two princes, who each carried a bow in hand and had swords strapped to their waists. Wearing on their shoulders two large quivers of arrows, the princes looked like a pair of three-headed serpents. Bow, quiver of arrows, and sword. A pair of three-headed serpents following behind the sage. Their brilliant jewels set off their dark complexions. The two resplendent boys because they're 12 years old, added luster even to the shining sage Vishwamitra, as the two gods, Skanda and Ganapati, adorned the immortal Shiva. After covering about 12 miles along the beautiful southern bank of the Sarayu, they arrived at a stretch of soft grass sheltered by trees. Vishwamitra stopped and turned towards Rama and Lakshman. Sit here comfortably and sip a little sanctified water for purification. I will now tell you the mystical mantras known as Bala and Atibala. The hymns will confer upon you freedom from all fatigue and fever. Indeed, they will release you from hunger and thirst, and will even prevent decrepitude. While you mutter these sacred spells, none on earth will be your equal in either battle, intellectual judgment, or argument. Bala and Atibala are the sources of all wisdom, being the daughters of the self-born creator, Brahma. Vishwamitra looked upon the brothers' faces, and he felt deep affection for them. Now, just comment. I have to comment. He knows they're Vishnu. And he's giving them mantras. And he has affect for them. So this is very important in the whole story of Vishwamitra, from where he was long ago. Now he's in the process of becoming a perfected Vaishnav because of his acumen with austerities, etc. He has the ability to understand, but understanding is not sufficient. Devotional service is sufficient. And he's rendering services. And it's very interesting because he's in the role of guru. he's going to allow them. It's really nice, really nice. Let's see what devotional. In the whole trajectory of Vishwamitra from where he was to where he ends up, there's many stages and service to these two lords and service to Dasarath. It's a very important part of transitioning. Although he knew they were not ordinary men, out of love he wanted to serve them, acting as their teacher and guide. For their part, the princes felt an equal affection for the sage, and they gladly reciprocated his love, accepting him as their guru. The sage positioned himself near the seated princes, and after sipping holy water for purification, held up his right palm and began chanting the mantras. With a cheerful expression, Ram and Lakshman received the two hymns from the sage. When the instruction was complete, they rested for the night on the bank of the river, enjoying the cool breeze that wafted gently across the water. And then comes another really important passage from Valmiki Ramayana. Shortly before dawn, Vishwamitra, who had remained awake in meditation all night, awoke the two princes, calling out to them, "O Rama and Lakshmana, O tigers among men, the sun approaches the eastern horizon. Rise up now and perform your ablutions. We must proceed." Valmiki Ramayana is so much loved by the Sri Vaishnavas that this verse recited by Vishwamitra Muni is the mantra that Sri Vaishnavas use for waking up deities in deity worship in the morning. According to their own acharyas, I don't know from direct experience, but they really love Ramayana. The different parts are very meaningful for them. We discussed that yesterday, although the class got cut off, but the 18 principles or cardinal teachings within Ramayana, most of them hover around Sharanagati and serving the Lord, and the moods and messages of the elements of serving the Lord, surrendering to Him. It appears to me that like Srimad Bhagavatam is for us, the Ramayana is for them. It's like that's their gold standard, and they go by that with great detail, great devotion. The brothers immediately rose and bathed in the river. After their prayers and meditations, they approached Vishwamitra and bowed at his feet. The sage, having bestowed blessings upon the boys, again led the way as the sun rose upon another cloudless day. Soon they saw the river Ganges, where it met the Sarayu. On the bank of the Ganges were many simple dwellings, made from leaves and mud, in which there lived a community of ascetics. The princes asked Vishwamitra about the hermitage. The sage, remembering the history of the site, laughed heartily and told them the story of how Cupid had once come to assail Shiva here. A very long time ago, the god of love had a human form. On one occasion, he had been bold enough to fire his arrows of love at the incomparable Shiva, the powerful Shiva, who had been absorbed in deep meditation at the hermitage, became infuriated and gazed at Cupid with his third eye. A searing flame shot out, reducing Cupid's body to ashes. From then on, Cupid became known as Ananga, the bodiless one. And the land there became known as Anga. I mean, there's much more to the story. It's a very interesting story. But he's got to write a shortened version of Ramayana, so he just goes on. Finishing the tale, Vishwamitra said, all these sages are disciples of the glorious Shiva. Let us halt for the night here and converse with these mystics, O princes. While Vishwamitra spoke, the ascetics dwelling in the hermitage sensed from a distance the approach of the sage and the princes. Realizing who they were, those worshippers of Shiva, who himself always worshipped Vishnu, felt happy at heart and came out quickly to greet their exalted guests. Having been graciously received, the three travelers performed their evening rituals and took a simple meal of forest fare. Vishwamitra entertained the assembly with ancient tales of heroes and sages of the past. No, it doesn't give the detail, but the detail in Valmiki Ramayana is fantastic. The following morning, after crossing the Ganges in a boat provided by the ascetics, Vishwamitra and the princes came to a vast, desolate region. On all sides were huge trees stripped of their foliage. The ground was laid waste, and winds gusted, carrying sand and debris which lashed at their faces. The cries of wild animals and vultures resounded there, and even the sky above was dark and overcast. Ram and Lakshman looked around. What had happened? The land so far had been beautiful and verdant. Ram and Vishwamitra asked Vishwamitra, this forest appears inaccessible and foreboding. What is this land inhabited with fierce beasts of prey and presenting such a terrible aspect? Smiling, even in the face of that fearful scene, Vishwamitra replied, my dearest Ram, a long time ago, this was the site of two prosperous kingdoms built by the gods. It came to pass one day that Indra became afflicted with the sin of killing a Brahmana. Overcome with impurity, Indra sought the powerful rishis, the most exalted of the Brahmanas, as his refuge. They performed rituals of purification and bathed his body with Ganges water, which fell here on this tract of land. Pleased with this land for receiving his impurities, Indra blessed it, saying, here will rise two great kingdoms, which will flourish for many years and will be known as Malada and Kurusha. The party had stopped at the edge of the forest of bare trees as Vishwamitra spoke. The way ahead was virtually enveloped by darkness. Terrible sounds emanated from the forest. The sage continued telling the brothers about the land. Sometime after Indra had founded the cities, there came to that region a yaksha woman named Tataka, as powerful as 1,000 elephants and able to assume any form she desired. She was the mother of Maricha, who now assailed Vishwamitra's hermitage. Fearsome and filled with malice towards all beings, Tataka constantly ravaged that land, and thus no one lived there. Although it was once the site of flourishing cities, it was now almost impossible to even approach. Turning toward the princes, Vishwamitra said, the time has now come for the demise of the evil Tataka. You two princes should follow me to the place where she resides, search her out, and end her life immediately. Being Ram replied with a smile, "Being a woman, O sage, how can Tataka have such power?" Vishvamitra knew that the virtuous Ram was hesitant to attack a woman, but Tataka was no ordinary woman. The sage described her background. She had been born as the beautiful daughter of a great and powerful yaksha named Suketu. As a youth, she was given a boon by Brahma that she would possess the strength of 1,000 elephants. She married the famous yaksha Sunda, who was eventually killed as a result of a curse made by the sage Agastya. There was a reason for the curse by the sage Agastya. He attacked. When Tataka learned of her husband's death, she became infuriated with Agastya, and, along with her son, Maricha, she rushed toward the sage, desiring to kill him. The sage stood his ground. He said to the two advancing yakshas, "As you act so wickedly, may you both become demons, O Tataka. You shall lose your attractive form, and instead become an ugly, man-eating Rakshasi." Agastya then vanished from the spot. It's really an interesting story. Vishvamitra raised his hand and indicated the path ahead of them. Tataka had turned the entire region into a desolate forest by her malevolent presence. She was always angry and would attack anyone who approached the area. Having told the brothers Tataka's story, the sage reassured them. Although the scriptures state that a woman should always be protected and never attacked, in this case you need not fear any sin. The killing of Tataka is necessary for the good of society. One wishing to protect the afflicted must sometimes perform even a seemingly sinful act. This is the eternal duty of kings, O Ram. You should not hesitate. Citing other historical examples of kings and gods who had killed evil women, Vishvamitra urged Ram to quickly kill Tataka. Ram accepted the sage's order and grasped his golden bow. I mean, there's lots of details that are missing. But one of the things I like is, my father said, whatever you say I should do, so I'll do whatever my father said. Simply that you're saying so, consider it done. Standing ready for combat, he said to Vishvamitra, here it is. My father instructed me on leaving Ayodhya that your order should be followed without hesitation in obedience to them, then to both his and your command. I will now face the fierce Rakshasi. I wish to do good to the Brahmins and cows in the region, as well as to satisfy your holy self. Please point out to me the whereabouts of that wicked demon. Vishvamitra led them a little further into the wilderness. Rama twanged his bowstring, which produced a terrific sound, filling the four quarters. All the forest animals were terrified by the noise. Tataka herself was stunned and overcome with anger. Who dared to challenge her? Whoever it was, they would soon regret their foolishness. She came out from her cave and ran towards the source of the sound, screaming horribly. Seeing her at a distance emerging from the forest in a terrible fury, monstrous in size and awful in appearance, Ram said to Lakshmana, "Behold, my dear brother, this formidable and fearful yaksha woman. The very sight of this sinful wretch would break the hearts of the timid. Watch me put her to flight with my sharp arrows. In truth, I do not really want to kill her, as she is a woman. I shall put an end to her strength by rendering her immobile and powerless, cutting from her body her hands and feet." As Ram spoke, Tataka rushed towards him, roaring with her arms upraised. Uttering a powerful mantra, Vishwamitra checked her progress, calling out, "May victory attend the Ayodhya princes!" Creating a swirling cloud of dust, Tataka confounded the princes and disappeared. With her mystic powers of illusion, she employed numerous conjuring tricks. She used so many forms, one after another. Sometimes she appeared in front of the brothers, then she would be above them, then again she would suddenly appear behind them. One moment she appeared as a furious horned animal, and the next moment she became a terrible-looking fiend. Then she swooped down upon them as a great clawed bird, hurling upon the brothers huge rocks and boulders. She screamed fearfully. Ram flew into a rage. He parried the rocks with a shower of shafts from his bow. He shot arrows with blinding speed. His bow appeared to be always bent into a circle. Taking razor-headed arrows, he severed Tataka's 2 arms, even as she came running towards him. Lakshman also became furious. He released sharp arrows with deadly accuracy and sliced off her nose and ears. Seemed to be standard procedure. The Yaksha woman disappeared and rose up into the sky. Even though deprived of her arms, she used her sorcery to throw down more massive trees and boulders. Remaining invisible, she moved hither and thither, screaming. All the while, Vishwamitra saw the boys mystified by the Rakshasi's illusory powers. He realized that they were holding back because Tataka was a woman. The sage called out to the brothers, "Have done with your tenderness. This woman should not be spared, sinful and wicked. She thoroughly deserves death at your hands. Act swiftly to end her life before nightfall, as the demons are always more powerful after sunset." Ram then showed his skill at archery. He released arrows capable of striking an invisible target by seeking out sound. Reciting mantras as he let them go, Ram covered Tataka in a network of arrows. Those arrows reduced the falling stones to powder. They pierced the Rakshasi, and she screamed in pain. She quickly came down to earth again. Tataka then assumed a vast form and rushed with the force of a tempest towards the 2 brothers. Ram decided that she should be killed. He quickly fired an arrow imbued with the energy of a thunderbolt. It hit the Rakshasi full in the chest. Tataka's heart was ripped apart, and with a hideous cry, she fell dead. Test your blood pressure and see. Having watched Ram slay the demoness, the gods, headed by Indra, assembled in the skies and applauded. Celestial flowers rained down on the 2 princes. Acknowledging the gods' pleasure, Ram and Lakshman modestly bowed their heads. The 1,000-eyed Indra said to Vishwamitra, and this isn't in Valmiki Ramayana, they don't have a conversation, but here they're having, that all the gods are gratified with Ram's feat, O holy Brahman. Show Ram your affection by giving him your knowledge of the celestial missiles. A great objective of the gods will soon be accomplished by Ram with the use of these weapons. Indra was considering Vishnu's desire that Ravana and his Rakshasa horde be annihilated. As he looked upon the mighty Ram, he knew that the time for the destruction of the Rakshasas was imminent. After Indra had spoken, the gods returned to the heavens and twilight fell. Embracing Ram and Lakshman, Vishwamitra said, "Let us remain for the night in this forest. Freed from the curse of Tataka, it is now rendered so peaceful, so very peaceful and attractive. In the morning, we shall continue on to my hermitage." The three of them rested for the night, praised by heavenly bards and singers who had assembled in the canopy of the sky. The next morning, Vishwamitra remembered Indra's words. He sat the two princes down and faced them. "Steady your minds, O heroes, for I shall now tell you the knowledge of the gods' mystic weapons, including even those presided over by the invincible Brahma, Shiva, and Vishnu. Equipped with this knowledge, you will be able to forcibly bring under your control even the host of gods and demons, including the Gandharvas and Nagas, the powerful celestial serpents." Vishwamitra sat facing the rising sun, and after purifying himself by sipping water and intoning sacred hymns, he began to repeat to Ram a string of mantras capable of invoking the celestial weapons, calling each weapon by name, by the name of its presiding deity. Vishwamitra delivered to Ram all those divine missiles, thousands in number and difficult for even the gods to remember in their entirety. As they were called, they came before Ram in their shining ethereal forms. Some appeared like glowing coal, others were smoky, while others were brilliant like the sun or moon. Filled with joy at being called to Ram's service, they stood before him with folded hands and asked for his command. Ram accepted them with affection and asked them to personally appear within his mind whenever he thought of them. The personified missiles replied, "It shall be as you say." Taking leave of Ram, the weapons circumambulated him with respect and returned to their own heavenly abodes. After teaching the brothers the full knowledge of firing and recalling the weapons, Vishwamitra finally said, "The instruction is complete. O glorious princes, we should now continue toward our destination." They moved on from that spot and soon saw in the distance a great cluster of trees, appearing like a mass of dark clouds on the horizon. As they came closer, they saw it was a beautiful corpse containing varieties of flowering and fruit-bearing trees. Sweetly singing birds filled the air, and graceful deer moved about next to the rivulets of clear water. Looking at Vishwamitra, Ram inquired, "What is the name of this place, so pleasing to the mind?" "It seems we have arrived at the site of some holy hermitage. Can it be that we have now reached your own abode, O learned Brahmin?" Although possessed of infinite knowledge, Ram had fully assumed the role of Vishwamitra's student. He listened attentively as the sage smiled and told him the ancient story of Bali and Indra. Once, the immensely powerful King Bali, lord of the demons and enemy of the gods, seized the seat of Indra and began to rule over the universe. Becoming famous throughout the three worlds of heaven, earth, and hell, he remained in that position for a long time. The gods had become perturbed, and with Indra at their head, they sought out Vishnu. The Lord then appeared as Vamana, accepting the form of a Brahmana boy. On the plea of charity, he took from Bali the three worlds, restoring them again to the gods. Vamana then remained for some time at this hermitage, known as the Siddha Ashram, sanctifying it by his presence. Vishwamitra concluded, "It is here that I have my dwelling, O Ram. Let us go there now." Taking the two princes by the hand, the sage entered his hermitage. As he walked into the large compound, he resembled a full and cloudless moon, accompanied by two brilliant stars. There were numerous hermits moving about in that grassy enclosure. Some tended sacred fires, while some of the younger ones chopped wood or worked on constructing the large central altar meant for the main sacrifice. In some places, groups of sages sat reciting Sanskrit hymns of the Vedas, while elsewhere other sages cleaned and prepared sacrificial paraphernalia. Ram and Lakshman looked with interest upon the busy scene that greeted them. Despite the bustle, an atmosphere of tranquility prevailed, and the hermits glowed with ascetic power. Seeing that Vishwamitra and the princes had arrived, the hermits sprang up and paid their respects. They offered water and forest fruits to the two princes. It was late in the evening, and long shadows stretched across the ground. The sacrifice would begin the next day. On Vishwamitra's order, the hermits showed the two boys a secluded cottage. One of the sages said, "Rest now for the night, and tomorrow, led by Vishwamitra, we will go through the ceremony to consecrate our sacrifice. Surely our success is now certain, because we see you two princes before us, equipped with every weapon, and shining like the sun." Now, a scene that's missing is the two boys at the feet of Vishwamitra, massaging his feet. It's such a lovely scene, the exchange between them. It's really, really, really nice. I'm going to ask him to put it in the next edition. The sages gazed with gratitude at Rama and Lakshman. They had been afflicted by the Rakshasas for a long time and had prayed for deliverance. In his prayers and meditations, Vishwamitra had understood the Lord's plan. The sage had thus gone to Ayodhya, looking for Ram. Now the divine prince had actually come to personally deliver the ascetics from their suffering. As they watched the two boys lie down to sleep, the sages were struck with wonder. In their hearts, they offered worship and praise to Vishnu. Before dawn the next morning, the princes rose and went through their daily rituals. After offering obeisances to Vishwamitra, they sat down by the side of the sacrificial altar. Facing the sage with folded hands, Rama asks, "O venerable sir, please tell us when and where we can expect the evil Rakshasa to appear." Vishwamitra remained impassive, but the other hermits applauded the boys, seeing their readiness to tackle the demons. One of them replied, "Vishwamitra is now observing a vow of silence, which he will keep for the next 6 days and nights, remaining awake throughout. At the end of that period, close to the completion of the sacrifice, the two demons will assail this area with all their force, but be ready, for the treacherous Rakshasas could appear at any time." You can hear the drum roll and the trumpets. The princes were eager for a fight. They stood vigilantly by Vishwamitra's side as he sat silently meditating upon the sacrificial hymns. Ram leaned on his great bow, which stood almost as tall as him. Lakshmana held in his hand a shining blue sword, its golden handle impressed with bright gems. As the sixth night approached and the final rituals were being performed, the sacrificial fire suddenly blazed forth furiously. A loud clamor came from the sky, which was covered over by clouds. Swooping down upon that sacrifice, the two Rakshasa demons, Marisha and Subahu, appeared from the sky. They were accompanied by their fierce and terrible looking followers. As they spread their sorcery, torrents of blood and pus, as well as large pieces of flesh, fell upon the altar. Blazing fires sprang from the earth, and hot coals flew everywhere. Shrieking horribly, the Rakshasas danced about, wreaking havoc. The hermits fell back, but this time they were not fearful. Vishwamitra quickly stood up. It was time for these evil beings to receive their just deserts. They had defiled his sacrifice once too often. They would not do it again. Gathering the other ascetics, Vishwamitra moved aside and ordered Ram to attack the Rakshasas. Ram became infuriated upon seeing the scene of devastation. He rushed forward towards the Rakshasas, calling to his brother, "Watch now as I scatter those wicked demons who feed on raw flesh." Even as he spoke, Ram continuously worked his bow. He sent swift arrows in all directions. The Rakshasas were stunned. They had not expected any resistance. Some of them closed quickly on Ram, covering him on all sides. Ram released arrows with deadly accuracy and speed. The Rakshasas were cut to pieces. Ram looked from Marisha, seeing his huge form nearby, tearing at the sacrificial altar. Ram invoked a celestial weapon. He placed it on his bow and, although still feeling furious, he calmly said to Lakshman, "I shall release the Manava weapon, presided over by the father of the gods, Manu." Ram angrily fired his arrow at the fierce and roaring Marisha. The demon was struck by the mighty missile, and he was lifted and flung a distance of 800 miles, landing in the ocean. Although reeling and struck senseless by Ram's arrow, Marisha was not killed. Ram looked at Lakshman. "See the force of that weapon, my brother. It easily hurled the demon to a vast distance." Ram and Lakshman continuously discharged flaming arrows at the other Rakshasas. Imbued with mystic power, one arrow expanded into thousands. It appeared as if a continuous line of shafts was leaving Ram's bow. So fast was his movement. The Rakshasas screamed in pain. Some of them vanished, and others fell dead on the ground. Some entered the earth, while others flew up in the sky. Regrouping, a large number of demons rushed down from the sky toward the princes. They hurled lances, iron maces, massive rocks, and blazing coals. Ram and Lakshman stood firm, parrying that shower of weapons with their arrows, tightly grasping his golden bow. Ram said to his brother, "Fear not, Lakshman, for I shall now swiftly deal with those blood-sucking demons. They are wicked and merciless and always given to sinful acts. This indeed shall be the last sacrifice they defile." Having said this to his brother, Ram moved with agility, evaded the rocks thrown by the demons. He invoked the weapon presided over by the god of fire, Agni. Fired from Ram's fully extended bow, the weapon hit the Rakshasa Subahu fully upon the chest. His heart torn apart, he fell dead on the ground like an uprooted tree. Ram then invoked the Vayu Astra, the powerful wind weapon. He fired it, and a roaring gale went towards the Rakshasas. They were blown away like so many pieces of dust and debris. Those who were not killed by that weapon fled for their lives. As the clamor of battle died down, Ram and Lakshman felt their anger subside. They stood holding their bows and looked at Vishwamitra. The sage was delighted. He approached the princes. "I have accomplished my purpose, O mighty armed heroes. You have perfectly followed your preceptor's order. we can now continue the sacrifice for the good of the people. With tears in his eyes, Vishwamitra gazed for some time at the two handsome brothers. He thought of Vishnu's cosmic arrangement. The Lord always protected his worshippers, and for the well-being of the world, ensured that sacrifices could proceed. Overwhelmed with love, the sage finally said to the boys, "Rest peacefully now, for tomorrow we shall leave this place." The many ascetics in the hermitage gathered around to congratulate the brothers. They led them to a spacious cottage near the river. After showing the princes their accommodation, the hermits offered them forest fruits and cooked wild vegetables. Ram and Lakshman graciously accepted their offerings and then lay down for sleep, exhausted by the day's events, or to speak of 6 days' events. The next morning, the princes came before Vishwamitra and respectfully asked, "What other orders of yours should we now carry out, O best among the Brahmins?" The sage told them of a sacrifice about to be performed by Janaka, the king of Mithila. He wanted to take the princes there, where they would see a magnificent bow owned by Janaka. The strength of that bow was inestimable. It was formerly held by Shiva himself and could not be bent by either gods, Gandharvas, or demons, what to speak of humans. Janaka kept it enshrined in a hall where it was worshipped daily by his priests. "Indeed," said the sage, "the bow can hardly even be gazed upon except by the mighty. The king has declared that any man who bends this bow will win the hand of his daughter, Sita, a veritable jewel among women, who was born from the earth itself. Let us leave for that place immediately." Vishwamitra gave orders to the sages to make ready for the journey. 100 carts were filled largely with sacrificial paraphernalia and yoked to strong asses. At the head of 1,000 rishis, who were all reciting auspicious texts from the scriptures, Vishwamitra and the two princes set off towards Mithila, traveling in a northerly direction along the bank of the Ganges. Just one more page. As they left, herds of beasts and flocks of birds dwelling all around the hermitage began to follow them out of affection. Vishwamitra and the other sages addressed the creatures in their own speech and persuaded them to return. They walked for some days, having covered a long distance, and arriving at the bank of the Sone River, the sages stopped to rest just before nightfall. The lowing of cattle and the cries of cowherds could be heard all around. As they settled down, the travelers looked across the smooth waters of the river, which glowed orange under the setting sun. During the day, they had passed many flourishing villages and settlements and seen that the land was farmed and well managed. Ram, seated comfortably among the ascetics, asked Vishwamitra where they were. Vishwamitra, who had lived thousands of years and knew the history of the entire earth, smilingly began to narrate the story of that land. It was called Kusha Nabha, after an ancient king of the same name, who was a son of the rishi named Kusha. Kusha Nabha was Vishwamitra's grandfather. Having descended in the line of Kusha, Vishwamitra was also known as Kaushika, and he had an elder sister named Kaushiki. After unfailingly serving her rishi husband, she had ascended bodily to heaven and later became the holy river Koshi. Vishwamitra had for a time led a life of asceticism on the bank of that river by the side of the Himalayas. Because of his desire to perform a sacrifice, he came down to the plains, and it was soon after that that he had secured Ram's assistance. The evening passed as Vishwamitra told this and other tales. Seeing the onset of night, the sage at last said, "The beasts and birds are buried in sleep, and all the quarters stand enveloped in darkness. The firmament shines brightly with stars, as though covered with innumerable eyes. Here rises the moon, dispelling the darkness of the world and spreading his soothing rays all around. Fearful hosts of nocturnal fiends are freely roaming here and there. Let us rest, ready for a renewed journey tomorrow." Glorifying Vishwamitra, the brothers lay down and courted sleep, awed at the sage's stories. So we're missing many of his glorious stories. He's a really good storyteller. And of course, Valmiki is the storyteller, telling Vishwamitra's stories. But there's like so many of the descent of the Ganges, and we have to rewrite the whole Valmiki Ramayana. It doesn't fit in that many pages. Kind of makes you want to go back and read all those stories. Okay, it's 7:35, 7:37.
10 minutes past.
35?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, 7:37. Okay. So, little summary. I was thinking as we started, looking at all these paintings of Krishna, B.G. Sharma's wonderful paintings of Krishna. We're worshippers of Krishna, but as worshippers of Krishna, Rama di Murshishu Kala Niyamena Tishtan. I was thinking of that verse from Brahma Samhita. Krishna is the source of everything, including all the various expansions, beginning with Ramadi, etc. And the pastimes of Lord Ramachandra are very charming, very powerful, very purifying. It's the part of the nature of culture is by regularly hearing these recitations, culture automatically comes into the individuals and the groups of individuals, society, gathering together. Prabhupada told the story from his childhood, not so long ago. Whenever there was a public gathering, always there was some recitation of Mahabharata or Ramayana. It was just, that's what you do. And the result of hearing continuously every time there's a gathering, morning and evening, certainly in the evenings, it gives the foundation for culture. And why is it that young people today regularly report, I find chanting boring? Or different ways of saying like that, not everyone, but because, the culture is missing. And the culture doesn't just mean Bharatanatyam dancing. Culture means the life of hearing and living a life in resonance or consonance with the Supreme Lord and His wonderful qualities and activities and loving exchanges and so forth. It just, becomes part of life. So one of the things that I find attractive about Srimad Bhagavatam is the Bhaktivedanta purports, little glorification of Prabhupada. Not so long ago, I had some interaction with a devotee from Kerala. And the devotee from Kerala said that when she came to America to do her studies and then work, her mother was very concerned because her mother was a very traditional mother. So her mother became very happy when she started practicing Krishna consciousness because it resembled her practices from her mother's childhood, her grandmother's childhood. So in the course of time, she got in the local language a Srimad Bhagavatam translated in their language. And so she gifted a copy to her grandmother and a copy to her mother. And when she got home to visit grandma and mom, she was amazed to see how happy they were. That her grandmother said, since my childhood I've been reading Srimad Bhagavatam. I probably read Bhagavatam. She showed her the volume that she was reading from because it was not with purports, it was just the Bhagavatam verses. Hundreds of times, but I never understood it. No, she had the adhikar, the qualification to understand Krishna's here, but she didn't understand it. But now, it's reading the purports from the BBT, it's come to life, and she was feeling very, very happy. So it's hearing these, just like many devotees like the chapter a day, Chad, you know that one. It's just the verses, and reading the verses without the purports. It's nice. It's a beginning, but we won't understand the verses without the purports. We don't understand them. So hearing Ramayana like this, it's similar. It's without the purports. It's especially having spent some time with Ramayana, reading translations of the commentaries of the Sri Vaishnavacharyas about these pastimes. That's just a little sharing. There was a team of maybe 15 devotees that could English speaking that knew Tamil, maybe fewer than 15, maybe 12, and they divided up the whole of the Aranyakanda and Kishkindakanda and all the commentaries, I mean, many of the commentaries, and translated them from Chinese, from Tamil into English. Rich. It reminded me of what I heard, or when I heard this story from this grandmother. She read so many times, but she didn't really understand. So how are we going to really understand? I mean, there's richness in all of this. That the more you hear, and the more you hear the commentaries about it, even they're diverse in what they have to say about what the verse is saying. There's a richness that comes to life. And I wasn't born in India. I didn't know any of these things. But so what to speak of those that have grown up? And the great asset for all of us is the Bhaktivedanta purports. And that means the writings of our previous acharyas from the Bhagavatam in particular, and then similarly for the Ramayana, those elevated personalities who it's their life. And they went deeply, deeply, deeply and had lots of realizations. I mean, as we mentioned yesterday, Govindaraj, it was several hundred years after the time of Ramanujacharya and Jamunacharya, but he was so absorbed that Balaji himself instructed him, write commentary. I mean, pretty amazing. His life was around the time of the life of Lord Chaitanya, probably a little bit before, because there's not certainty when he lived. But it must have been like an amazing time in India when Ballavacharya and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and these personalities from the Sri Sampradaya. What was it like? What was it like? Glorious time. So very rich and inspiring, and devotionally journeying. I haven't had the time yet to go through it, but one of Jayapataka Maharaj's disciples, named Vidvan Gauranga, has dedicated himself to translating multiple commentaries, and especially Govindaraj's commentary on Valmiki Ramayana, along with, so it's like a massive undertaking. And I'm looking forward. Just the Balakanda is 3 volumes, and each volume is that thick. And then, etc. Ayodhya Kanda is 4 volumes, I think. So, and it's part of our, of course, our main devotion and service is to Krishna. But here we are, it's Ram Navami coming up, and we're hearing about Lord Ramachandra. It's very sublime. So let's see if there's some discussion. Or comments? Or questions? Or silence?
There's a question online.
Okay, go ahead.
From Atulya Didi. What principle is Lord Ram teaching when he ardently follows the order of his father? How to use this principle in current time and place?
Are you thinking about your daughter? Her daughter is a very free-thinking young girl. She has 2 daughters, but the older of the 2 is no. It's a Vedic principle. It's certainly extremely important because it came up later, and it comes up, throughout. It wasn't elastic at all. He could not stretch and bend or make his convenience match the order. It just followed the order. That's the principle that Ram was teaching. The order of his father is his life. There's nothing more important to him than that. So the application can be current is satyam, or dedication to truth. For him, the truth was the order of his father. Something like this other explanation, that when Vishwamitra said something, Dasarath didn't question it, or in Chaitanya Charitamrita, when King Prataparudra just heard from Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Lord himself. That was it. He's not just an elevated sannyasi. He is the personality of Godhead. He just heard it, and that was it. I accept. No, wait a minute. So that's a characteristic of one whose consciousness is clear and who has an authority that they have absolute regard for. And that was the model or the example that Ramachandra was teaching. And the practical application today is we're really far from that standard. We question everything. We're trained in Western education, challenge everything. You get rewarded for challenging everything. Your smartness is that you challenge everything. It's really quite different than the descending process of knowledge, or the orderliness of respecting wisdom and respecting elders who carry wisdom and so forth. But it's one of the bearers of culture. Now, where are those persons to respect? That's another problem. But when there is someone worthy of respect, a practical application for us in ISKCON is our founder Acharya, the unquestionable perfected soul. And if it's said, of course, we want to make sure we have the proper understanding of what was said in the context, etc. But we don't question the source. Once we understand the message from the source, that's it. And an application point is we, like you as a mother, or every one of us as a responsible person in society, we have to align ourselves so that we can carry forward the message and the instruction of our founder Acharya unflinchingly. Easier said than done, right? But that's the application. Something else? We have something here.
Like Lord
Button.
Lord Chaitanya was trying to experience how it is to be a devotee. What was Krishna trying to show us or experience by being Lord Ram?
That's easy. I mean, the ideal king. He came with that model. This is the model of an ideal king. And one of the emblems of an ideal king is very obedient to his father, to the previous king, following, and very obedient to the teachers under whom his father placed him. So, etc., etc., standing by virtue and never deviating from virtue, always being interested in giving protection to the innocent. And so all of the other, the standards by which decisions were made was the standard of an ideal king. He sacrificed his own comfort, safety, well-being, interests, etc., in order to uphold the standards of the ideal king. Sometimes he was questioned, but he always had the answer for why he did certain things that he did. The ideal king.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much. Maharaj, this is just a comment. I was just trying to draw a parallel, and the Supreme Lord always likes to have his devotee take the credit. But the past time that we were just hearing, that Vishwamitra gave the hymns like the Bala and Atibala to the Supreme Lord for him to execute certain duties. So it's interesting that it can work the other way also. When Lord can take instructions, or he can take the credit from instructions from a devotee.
I have a comment on your comment. And my comment is that the function was a human being, not the function of the Supreme Lord. So Vishwamitra had a sense of both, and the function of the human being destroying Ravana, who is undestroyable by even the gods. He's giving him celestial weapons, but he can't be defeated by the gods. But he can be defeated by the weapons of the gods in the hands of a... So it's part of the Leela.
Mm-hmm.
And he is playing a role in the Leela. Although, the degree to which he understood the divinity of Ram, one can say this and one could say that. He had some understanding, certainly. And he's engaging in devotional service. And now, I've contemplated, what's the role of, it's like a parental affection. Like Dasarath has towards Ram, Vishwamitra has towards Ram. Now, it's not fully like Dasarath, or it's certainly not fully like in Vrindavan. But it's there to some extent, the parental affection. So it's in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Leela also. When Ishwara Puri is giving mantra, he understands the service. Because he's not like just a nice sannyasi. So it's a blend and moving the rasa of parental affection is moving according to the will of Lord Ramachandra. So sometimes and sometimes, and sometimes and sometimes. In Govindaraj's commentary, this is along the same, my response is along the same line as what I'm about to say. Lord Ram is the Lord. He's playing the part of a prince, 12-year-old boy. So he's got a teacher. And so Vishwamitra is playing the role of the teacher to his student. Ram is enjoying that experience of having a teacher. It's a rasa, like, towards his parents. We think in terms, largely, I think in terms of Krishna's pastimes. Certain relationship with Yasoda Nanda, certain relationship with Vasudeva Devaki. He has a relationship with different types. So he's enjoying the rasa of having a teacher. It's not just, an actor on a stage, okay, I got my script and I'll play the part. It's a rasa that he's enjoying. At the same time, he's the Supreme Lord. So he's moving the hearts of those who he's having rasa with. So Govindaraj explains, I like this, there are two places in the whole of Valmiki Ramayana where he uses the phrase yadrishchaya. You've heard that term. Yadrishchaya means somehow or other. There's no apparent cause. And the cause, there is a cause. And it's Lord Ramachandra from within the heart, yadrishchaya, caused Kaikeyi to do what she did. It was a total game-changing what she did. And then the only other time is Shurparnaka, Yadrishchaya, she did what she did. Because it was a complete change. Ram was going to the sages' hermitages, giving them his association, which was Prithanaya Sadhunam, but he hadn't done any of the other one. So Yadrishchaya, from within the heart of Sharpanaka, he had her do what she did. So within the heart of Vishwamitra, he's having Vishwamitra do what Vishwamitra does. for the sake of enjoying that rasa or exchange of it with a teacher. He doesn't need a teacher. He knows he doesn't need a teacher, but he wants. And Vishwamitra is playing the role, although he knows. Anything else? Anything online? We're over. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Ki jai.
Look at that. It's 8 o'clock.